You are a small-time musician, right? Doesn't matter what instrument you play, doesn't matter what type of genre of music you're involved in or what have you, and you are contacted, okay, by a very large institution or establishment that is known for hosting parties for very wealthy people, right? And you think this is some kind of mistake or what have you, but then the institution that's reached out to you, whether it's an event planning place or a hotel, you know, a lot of these places where very wealthy people come together and hold certain events, and you name it, right? They then tell you, no, this is not a mistake. We would like you to perform at, from 11 p.m. till 3, 4 a.m. In front of a very wealthy group of people, and you just think nothing of it. You, as a small-time musician, obviously you need the money, and you think, okay, this is great, let me go perform. So you're performing, right, in this, I guess you could say, nightclub or closed-off private hotel space, or you name it, right? You can think of any event space you want. And then all of a sudden, the lights suddenly go out completely. It's a little bit lightly dimmed, right? But then the lights go out completely. And then all of a sudden, as you're on stage and you look into the crowd, certain individuals' eyes, whether they're male or female, doesn't matter, certain individuals' eyes end up turning very sharply purple, right? And then some other eyes turn very sharply red, and the rest, as normally humans would be, you don't see anything, right? Because you're in the dark and you can't, humans are not supposed to have glowing eyes, right? So you run out of there, right? Later on, a couple days later, as you're still trying to process what you saw, you're then approached by some men in black and you're told never to speak of this again, and that's it, right? They don't ask to take your phone or anything like this. And you think to yourself, okay, these are very wealthy people, they're into certain things that the average person cannot afford, and some of them are very into some very weird stuff, as we know, right? And so maybe they have some type of contacts on or things like this. But then you find out later on down the road that other friends of yours in the music industry have witnessed the same thing at different times and at different parts of the world. And so you say to yourself, what the hell? Now, before I get into all this, I would like to give some very, very special shout-outs to a handful of people. I'd like to give a very special shout out to my very good friends Spencer and Alex. Guys, thank you so much for watching and supporting, as well as my friend Charlie. Thank you so much, sir, for watching and supporting as well too. In addition to that, my friend Joshua, who does some amazing artwork. In the coming episodes, as a quick preview, I'll put up some really cool artwork that he does. But in the meantime, let's jump right into it. So, Project Black Raven. Warping thermoelectric crystalline plasmas for optical VRIL readings. Now, first off, what we need to understand is that we need to understand that VRIL is allegedly the energy that encompasses everything around us, right? Whether you want to call it certain things like, ether or prana or chi, you name it, right? There's many different energies that, are composed of the very foundational substance that we live in. With that being said, I just wanted to recap that very quickly because I think most of you here that watch the show on even a semi-regular basis know that we've discussed VRIL quite extensively. However, what happens when there is certain physical technology within the dimension that we live in that could harness the VRIL technology apparatus that occurred thanks to the Rendlesham Forest incident in the early 1900s, which we spoke about previously, where Hitler ordered his Nazi soldiers to retrieve a crashed UFO disc and try to reverse engineer it. What happens when you intertwine that with something called therianthropy, and you'll see why I bring this up. But what is therianthropy? According to Wikipedia, therianthropy is the mythological ability of human beings to morph, if you will, into other animals by means of shapeshifting. It is possible that cave drawings found at Les Trois Frères in France depict ancient beliefs in the concept. The best known form of therianthropy is found in stories of werewolves, right? End quote. Now, before we go on, we can talk about how a lot of this may have to do with religion or culture or things like this. With that being said, I want to make something very significant relative to the overall concept of this episode, which is this right here. Let's take a look, folks, at this tweet right here. This is from just a handful of days ago. I personally screenshotted the tweet myself, and this gentleman says, there is a race called the Emerthers who live 12 light years from Earth, maybe around Tau Ceti, right, which is our, depiction of the mapping of the cosmos in this particular quadrant of the galaxy. They have made communications both with presidents and with the U.S. military men. I was asked in 2016 to translate their messages. The U.S. military knows this. Do you see this in their quote-unquote report? Now, you might be saying, okay, Dave, why do you bring this up? Well, folks, bear with me. Let's take a look at this article right here, and you're going to see very quickly how this comes full circle. ScientificAmerica.com. Do brainwaves conduct neural activity like a symphony? Now, I want to make something very clear. There was recently a very homemade experiment on which I'm sure the government knows about, where if you take mushrooms, more specifically magic mushrooms, the ones that we as humans would eat when you want to go on a psychedelic experience or a trip, whatever you want to call it, and you place a certain frequential reader on top of it, believe it or not, it translates those frequential readings and the frequencies that that mushroom emits into music, but music that people would normally associate with psychedelic trips in general, which is interesting. Now, take a look at this. A dispute at a big neuroscience meeting erupts over whether the field needs new thinking about the way clusters of neurons process information. Now, neuroscientists have long known about other forms of electrical activity present in the brain, in particular rhythmic voltage fluctuations in and around neurons, oscillations that occur at the same 60 cycle per second, frequency as AC current in the US have caught the field's attention. Those gamma waves encode information by changing a signal's amplitude, frequency, or phase, and the rhythmic voltage surges influence the timing of spikes. End quote. Now, here's what's very interesting as well too. This debate was sparked mainly out of the principal concept of the fact that there have been secret DoD meetings, Department of Defense, Pentagon, all these type of secret meetings that have to do with the exploitation and recent revelation, even on a classified level, which just goes to show you how compartmentalized it is. Even those at the top don't know what's really going on. How much of a significance frequencies pertaining to the eyeball, as a matter of fact, can be extracted. Now, let's not lose focus. Let's head back to the tweet that we had mentioned. More specifically, take a look at this right here. CropCircleConnector.com. And folks, I must admit to you, I got very lucky finding this. This is a website, obviously not a mainstream media website. However, this article here describes, and I will tell you very specifically within a certain eyewitness account, the exact same decoding that this gentleman who tweeted, who I blurred his name out for the sake of not wanting to, expose him or dox him respectfully, had actually mentioned. With that being said, let's take a look at this right here. More recently, in the autumn of 2015, John Burroughs, which was one of the U.S. servicemen to inspect a small triangular UFO on the ground in Rendlesham Forest near Rath Bentwaters, England, for about 1 hour in December of 1980. Now, take a look at this right here. One of those large UFOs apparently flew close down to the ground near Wadley, Georgia, around 1 a.m. on June 29th. That was the craft which CJ and other motorists saw. They said it looked like an airplane on fire because its propulsion system created a fire-like electrostatic charge behind. Now take a look at this right here. And I quote, this is from Jim Peniston, a second witness, all right, to the UFO in Rendlesham Forest. Take a look at this right here. Absolutely, it was telepathic because he received a binary code from the triangular craft that was mental telepathy. Now take a look. It was like a pictorial that was running a movie in my brain. It was a mind's eye kind of thing. It was flashing zeros and ones. Later we found out that the message was some kind of binary code. To be honest with you, I have trouble with algebra. I am not a math person by any means, let alone computers, and in 1980 I don't think we even had computers which we used, so it was foreign to me. End quote. Why do I bring this up, folks? It just goes to show you that, again, this might sound overly simplistic, but again, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it probably quacks like a duck. The fact that magic mushrooms, or psychedelics that have been naturally emerged from the planet for God knows how long, emit certain frequencies that we, for some reason, seem to be so dissipated from, so distant and so far from, when really it should be a natural correspondence of the way that we harness the VRIL energy, just goes to show you how much dissemination of propaganda through frequential suppression has influenced our minds, right? And again, this is quite the, I guess you could say, quite the revelation that this article came to find, that I came to find in this article, simply because we have to look at how, coincidental certain things are. Now, let's take a look at this right here. Disconnect from the matrix.blogspot.com. Take a look at the sound of silence. The physical, emotional, and psychological effects of this technology were so severe that the hundreds of thousands of Iraqi troops surrendered en masse without even firing a single shot against the US-led coalition forces. The numbers reported in the news were staggering. 75,000 and then another 125,000. Now again, what are we talking about here? We are referring to the quadruple S mind control system. Silent sound spread spectrum. Now again, if we take a look back at Desert Storm and things like that, we'll notice there was an abnormal amount of, I guess you could say, surrenders, if you will. Now again, we could argue that the US military was so strong back in Desert Storm, but ultimately that the fear was really instilled within these people within this operation and the people they were going after, if you will. But ultimately, folks, This seems to be much more plausible. The quadruple S, mind control apparatus. And how do I know this? Well, let's take a look at this right here. AIWorldGov.com. About AI government. The third annual AI World Government provides a comprehensive 2-day forum to educate federal agency leaders on proven strategies and tactics to deploy AI and cognitive technologies. End quote. Now, we will be getting into this, into the members episodes more often in the coming days, but there's a lot of CEOs that have invested in General Electric. Why do I bring that up? Well, let's take a look at this right here. If we take a look at the amount of CEOs that have retired, okay, in 2019, it was a record amount of CEOs. It was just north of 150 CEOs, all of which had a percentage or shareholder percentage within General Electric, the company GE, right? Which is interesting because if we take a look at this right here, CNBC.com, 5 books Bill Gates recommends for your summer reading. Take a look at this, folks, and look at what he's holding there. Lights out. General Electric. All right? And what is this? This is a subliminal form of some of the micro false flags, in which I had mentioned in an episode 2 days ago that came out, I believe it was, Friday evening, in which this is a form of subliminal asymmetrical warfare that is warning us in which certain apparatuses might in fact occur and happen. Now you might be saying, Dave, what does this have to do with therianthropy? You know, the I guess you could say mutation or merging or transformation of certain creatures from humans to aliens and what have you. It goes again back to the example I gave at the beginning, with the eyes being purple and things like this, and this overall concept of there being some form of subliminal warning to the masses in very subtle pictures like this. Now, here's the next thing I want to take a look at here. Entrepreneur.com. A casino gets hacked through a fish tank thermometer. I kid you not. This, I'm literally not even joking. And I quote, the hackers used a fish tank thermometer to get a foothold in the network. They then found the high roller database and pulled that back across the network, out the thermostat and up to the cloud. End quote. Now, the reason why I bring this up is intertwines directly with certain patents that have been allegedly filed, if we take a look here, by certain people that don't even exist, to be honest with you. Okay, and if we take a look at some of these patents that have been filed, I mean, let's be honest with you. Let's be honest with ourselves, folks. We all know that this is government cover-up of, someone that doesn't officially exist. But anyways, let's take a look at this right here. Report, USA Today. Human DNA found in hot dogs. Now, why is this so, I guess you could say, so prevalent, if you will? Well, allegedly, if you take a look at the recent Kraken episodes, there has been a record number of missing abductions within Nigeria. So for the people that say, oh, well, extraterrestrial abductions have ended and things like this, well, why do I bring that up? I bring that up because they have ended more so within the West. They still occur, don't get me wrong, but not nearly as much as they do in Europe, but more specifically in the continent of Africa, because again, the focus is not necessarily on Africa on the public end or on the back end as well, on the intelligence end too. So this is going to be pushed aside and no one's going to think twice. But take a look at this. Clear Food analyzed 345 hot dogs and sausages from 75 different brands sold at 10 retailers and found that 14% had hygienic or substitution issues, according to the report. End quote. Again, you might be saying, Dave, why do you bring this up? Well, again, if we take a look at the AI conference that has to do with the overall concept of how AI is getting so advanced and how it may in fact at this point already become self-aware in ways that we don't even realize, what we'll find is that the human DNA from the deep underground military bases has disseminated into the public domain again, thanks to other instances like this as well. New York Times, the big tuna sandwich mystery. A lawsuit against America's largest sandwich chain has raised questions about America's most popular canned fish. We tried to answer one. Is Subway selling tuna? End quote. Now, for those who don't know, there's a lawsuit saying that Subway's tuna is not actually tuna, and there actually has also been human DNA found within it as well, that many are saying too. So again, why is it now all of a sudden human DNA, UFO reports, Bill Gates with pictures of lights out? Why is this all accumulating now, right? We take a look at the gentleman that was assigned to decode some of these binary codes that have been given to him telepathically. It is because it is about harnessing and exponentially increasing the amount of human DNA already within our bodies, so that when certain abductions occur, more specifically with that within the African continent, but even within Europe and in the West as well too, what ends up happening here, folks, is that there is even more DNA squished into the human body, and so it's literally like taking a hamburger. Instead of having one, you have your bread, the buns, the relish, the ketchup, the whole thing, right? But instead of one hamburger or one patty, there's two, or maybe even three. That's what's happening here, except on a human level. And I know maybe that's a bad example, but the best way to visualize it would probably be the case. Now, take a look at this right here. Commondreams.org. Dangerous precedent. And by the way, before I go on very quickly, I just want to say that we do have a Patreon. It helps support the show, and the reason why I bring it up is because this is the limit I can hit on a public level, because we delve much more into the connections and intrinsic details of things. But anyways, dangerous precedent. U.S. High Court sides with corporate giants Nestle and Cargill in child slavery case. A lawyer for 6 men who alleged they were victims of human trafficking said the corporations, quote, should be held accountable for abetting a system of child slavery, end quote. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because this is how they do it. They use corporations and lawsuits through the different subsidiary bribes, that go through accounts within the intelligence community of Cyprus, the Mediterranean, you name it, in order to cover things up and make it just look like, oh, it's just a simple lawsuit, folks. Don't worry about it. It's a simple lawsuit. There's some children that may have been, abducted. We don't know where they went, but it's got to do with the corporation. Nobody would dare to think it's got to do with extraterrestrials. And even, folks, I would go as far as to say the corporations themselves don't know what's occurring here. So the reason why this actually happens, folks, is because, again, take a look at this right here. CNBC.com, McDonald's will launch its loyalty program nationwide in July, end quote. So the reason why it happens is because these corporations are now realizing, holy crap, the intelligence communities are setting us up in certain ways that are bringing more heat onto us. Therefore, we have to instill more positive and provocative programs like the one that McDonald's is doing with, their loyalty program, if you will. But ultimately, the reason is because the VRIL energy is being harnessed. And again, the reason why I brought up therianthropy is because that's how it was perceived so long ago to ancient human civilizations. But ultimately, what's happening here is that thermoelectric crystalline plasmas, are being used to use VRIL energy that are warped through the quadruple S program that I had mentioned earlier in order to take VRIL energy and curate it around heat signatures pertaining to human DNA, right? Which is why they squish more of it into the food. Therefore, when we eat it, by just natural mathematics or scientific or logical common sense reasoning, it's in our bodies. Boom. So when it's time for abductions or it's time for kill switches of certain kinds, I won't go any further than that, to be activated, it's not that hard. It's not that hard, right? And at this point, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple to see. And I'd like to end this episode off with this article right here. SCMP.com. Could a Chinese supercharged bacterium spark a superhuman revolution? Researchers say that they created an E. coli strain that can draw on electrons in the environment. Scientists' next task is to see if the technique can be applied, to complex life forms. How interesting. Doesn't this sound like the exact same thing that's being placed inside of the hot dogs and inside of the tuna that these lawsuits are alleging? And these lawsuits somehow end up trailing back to child slavery cases. And I'm not saying that they're fake, I'm saying they're real, but there's a big part of that child slavery case we're missing, which is that the childs that are recovered are accounted for, but what about the ones that have been permanently missing? Oh, but no, it's a corporation lawsuit, so it's just gonna end up being nothing. Don't worry about it, right? So, I'd like you folks to let me know what you think, and we'll catch all of you very, very soon. Cheers.